Hello random viewers and welcome to the season finale of my Kerbal Space Program series, Season 2. Season 3 will be picking up a little after this. I'll talk more about that later. Here we have one of our deep space refueling ships performing a burn to capture it in orbit around Duna. It is doing this inside of the atmosphere so as to save fuel, so the atmosphere is helping it do its burn by slowing it down at the same time. After a lot of orbital mechanics and things like that, it finally made it to the Ares ship, and it docked to one of the free docking ports and helped refuel all of the tanks. It still left a few empty, but we have the second refueler on its way to fix that issue. After the refueler was done with its docking maneuver, the ship that launched from the surface last episode undocked from the bottom of the ship and moved up underneath the engine section. There was a lot of rearranging of the ship here, and we jettisoned that one fuel tank that came with the Ares ship originally. We then docked the refueling ship, which is now completely empty of fuel except for monopropellant, to that piece of the original Ares ship, and we deorbit them together. And then here's the crash into the surface. Very eventful and interesting. It's strange that it really lost all that speed, but it did, and there were some very satisfying explosions. And then it was destroyed. We then brought in the other refueler, and that docked to the free docking port and finished refueling, but it still had a lot of fuel left over, so we docked the ship that we just looked at earlier to the bottom of that fuel tank. This gave this ship the range to go to Ike and to land there, and then it had the fuel to return back to the Ares ship and not run out along the way, which would have been the concern with that little stick of fuel that it carried with it, that also carried extra scientific instruments. After it was docked, it oriented itself and fired its engines, and those set it on a trajectory towards Ike. Once in orbit around Ike, the remnants of the Duna ascent vehicle descended down towards Ike. Kind of ironic, the ascent vehicle being used for a second descent. It's used for both an ascent and a descent. And now it's doing the whole thing over again on a moon. Didn't have landing legs, so it had to land on the engine bell. Also not a flat surface, so we had to burn a huge amount of electricity just to keep the thing from tipping over. We had time to get a few Kerbals out, do a little bit of science, but unfortunately Valentina was not able to leave the capsule because she was the pilot and she was necessary to keep the thing oriented so it wouldn't fall over. We deployed a flag, did a little bit of science, transferred the science from that stick of fuel. That way we could jettison the fuel as soon as we didn't need it anymore. I had these fuel gauges open so that I could see the fuel levels. Here's jettisoning that tank. It didn't go so well, but it worked out in the end. Once it had cleared that, it was able to reignite its engine and continue on its way back up to the fuel tank that it had left in orbit. It docked with that, and that carried it back to the Ares ship. At this point, it was time to bring Bill, Jebediah, and Bob back to the Ares ship, so they boarded their Duna ascent vehicle. Sorry, I did borrow that from the Martian. Just love that. We detached, took off. I sped this up so that you can watch, but it's very interesting how quickly it fades from this brightness of the surface into the darkness of space, just a few kilometers up. Once it makes it to space, it detaches from its stage and attaches to the Ares ship. Once docked, the other ship is brought in, and then they're both on there. The fueling ship that brought the second ship back to the Ares ship was docked to the back to serve as a fifth engine. After a few months of waiting, it was time to reignite the almost 3-year-old engines now, and that set the ship back on a trajectory towards Kerbin. When I realized those 4 engines weren't enough, I ignited the engine on the refueling ship. Once that was out of fuel, we jettisoned it, and it went into orbit around the sun, unfortunately. Not fun to have space junk, but whatever. There was the trajectory of going back to Kerbin. After we transmitted some science from the research lab, we researched some things in the tech tree. I sped that up because I took some time to decide. After a few months of deep space travel, the KSP started detecting some strange signals coming from the North Pole. So a few scientists were sent on this new, very fast but very efficient plane, and it was loaded with scientific equipment so that they could figure out what it was coming from. This right here is where it broke the sound barrier for the first time, and it probably would have been much faster had it not had those instruments strapped to it. This is where the polar ice caps first came into view. And once we were flying over those, the signal started getting stronger as we got closer to it. Then there were a few weird problems. Once the pilots finally regained control, they were able to get the alarm cut out, but they had lost an engine, and that was a problem. This plane was never really tested for flying on one engine, and it didn't really respond very well to having it ripped off. It could fly with one damaged, but not with it missing. It threw it way too far off balance. It was too light of a plane. The KSC was not happy to hear about this accident, but they were happy to notice that the signal was getting exponentially stronger the further they traveled on their landing path. They knew that they were getting very close, and as they rounded this hill, they saw something pretty strange. They started running scientific tests to try and figure out what it was. It was the crew, though, that really figured out what it was. You can see that up here in a second, we'll get a notification. Right now, the plane's just kind of rolling up to it. Any second now, it'll pop in the announcements. There it is, that we have discovered some kind of vessel. At least that's what the Kerbals think it is. And there are some strange distortions around it. Time kind of freezes a little. Things slide a bit more. Strange little things like that. And as they got closer, the readings just kept getting stronger. They knew that there was something pretty strange going on here. So they got closer and tried to take readings. And they spent a few minutes doing this, but they noticed they were sliding. In trying to readjust, something exploded and they were flung slightly. They decided it was good to observe from a safe distance. So once they recovered from the shock of having another thing explode, I think it was a control surface. No, I can't remember what it was that exploded. Anyways, they turned around down the hill and watched from the ice where it was a little bit further away and hopefully a bit safer. Meanwhile, the Ares ship was nearing Kerbin and getting ever closer. Right here, it was doing a slight burn to get itself somewhat captured. It had the fuel to spare to be able to do that in a highly elliptical orbit like this. And then it didn't have to worry about being flung into deep space if anything went wrong. But back on the surface, things were going really bad at the North Pole for the plane. The distortions were getting worse, and things were just definitely not fun for the crew. And all contact was lost after that. The Ares ship, receiving news of this, wanted to get away and get some distance from Kerbin, but that wasn't possible. The KSC then lost contact with the satellite, and they were advising the Ares ship to try to get out of there, but with orbital mechanics there's not a whole lot you can do, so they were forced to go into the atmosphere and perform their braking burn, hopefully staying at Apoaps. They had no other choice but just to continue on course. There's a lot more heating than usual on entering the atmosphere. It might have been the extreme speed, but once the engines were started, things started to slow down a bit. But then distortions started as well. They were getting the strange signals as well, and they knew that things were not going to be great for them either. And then there was an explosion in the engine assembly, and the ship began spinning uncontrollably. Fortunately, the signal was non-existent at this point, so they thought they were free. Once they got the spinning stopped and got it under control, they shifted the 2 rookie crew members to one of the outer vehicles and got them fired up as escape pods just in case things got worse. These Kerbals would later be very, very happy with this decision. But Bill, Jebediah, Bob, and Valentina stayed in the central core, and then there were explosions and all contact was lost there as well. So thank you so much for watching. Please do like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope to see you in Season 3. You'll really like it, and I hope you all have a very nice day.